What's up, guys? Tyler here with Western States Farrier Service. Today we're in a setting that most of us started out in as a farrier, and so we don't have the luxury of things like power, and we have to shoe the horse for application. Today's horses are ranch horses, so I do need a tighter fit. But what I'm dealing with in this horse right here is kind of a stereotypical, and maybe you guys have heard it before from clients, of like, I want to stand my horse up. I want my horse stood up. I want my horse stood up, but you can't due to certain elements in the hoof structure. This horse right here, chronic abscesses in the heels and in his bars. They originated in the bars, and I'll show you why. So he's not a horse that you can, quote unquote, stand up the traditional way by taking toe depth and leaving the height of the heels. So as we go through this, I'll talk about how you utilize length and depth to keep a sound capsule while also accommodating the limb and the alignment of the limb inside the hoof capsule. So let's get rolling on this guy. Like I said, this is a setting that we're all familiar with because most of us started in this setting. No power, tight fit. We don't have the luxury of running pads. In some of my videos, I get a chance to run pads and clips and bar shoes and all sorts of stuff to combat poor joints, or poor alignment. Well, this is a setting where we don't get a chance to do that. So as we start cleaning off this foot, a good indication right here. So I've got a line in my hoof capsule right there, and this horse abscessed, I guess, late last year in his heels, and that was the result. It blew out the hairline, and it was because this inside heel had too much height and it broke. I call it a popped bar, and it abscessed because bacteria got in there because that bar flexed too much and was bearing too much weight. So it was telling me my heels were too high, even though when looking from the side, these feet are very flat and almost, and they are negative, I believe, but in their palmar angles. So we'll be cognizant of our depth. That's critical, because when you take depth here at the tip of P3 and then you can't set a shoe back to accommodate the breakover point of the coffin bone, your weight bearing of the foot is all thrown out of whack. So this horse, as you can see, my lamina is really ugly. I don't know for a fact, but I believe this horse suffered from some sort of laminitis or otherwise issues before he got on the books, and so he does not grow a nice healthy hoof capsule. It's a very trashy hoof capsule. So I like to say that there's a lot of imagineering done when shaping a shoe to fit this foot. But first I want to point out my depth right here at our apex of the frog. So our frog is naturally defined away from our sole. It's not welded in. So this is a healthy hoof capsule and it functions well. But there's only, at this point, about a 1/4 inch of depth from my sole right here down to live sole. And I'm going to want to keep as much of that as I possibly can. So with using both methods of length versus depth in my trim, I'm going to try to accommodate this joint and the breakover of the coffin bone while also keeping as much depth at the tip of the coffin bone as possible, because that's the key to soundness. So I'm going to drop my heels, even though you want to quote unquote stand this horse up because he has that negative palmar angle or flat palmar angle. I'm going to drop my heels because those heels can't take the weight of this foot as it grows throughout the cycle. So I'm going to start by dropping my heels. Big old gnarly gaping hole where that abscess was. Now I'm going to knife a little bit of that out because I do feel like he can go a little bit shorter than that. Okay, now it's critical to basically have x-ray vision, but to see through the thickness of this wall and the thickness of the lamina, I need to collect up this hoof capsule as much as possible so that we can get that 8-week shoeing out of him, because that's the schedule these guys are on. And it also doesn't get this foot out of balance and overload my heels and result in this in 5 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever it is. So the amount of collection done on a foot like this is almost twice what the trim from the bottom is. And that's my length versus depth in some of my other videos that I've talked about. It's critical to make sure you get the length. And length isn't just the toe forward. Length is here and here. If you leave a gobby amount of hoof wall out here and here, it's still leverage when they're trying to move, and it will pull that hoof capsule one way or the other. So a nice, tidy, collected hoof capsule is essential for good growth on this guy, or proper growth. But as you can see, I don't have the chance to really see like quality of sole to make sure I'm short enough. I don't really have a nice tight white line. It's just a guess. So a lot of my evaluation is done solely around utilizing the widest part of the foot with my ratios, and then looking at my depth right here and trying to keep that. So that trim, he's a really big horse and he's heavy and he lays on you. So, but right there, I probably should have stopped and looked at the side profile of that foot before I bumped that shoe or bumped that wall up or collected that wall. It would have really given, painted a good picture. But I didn't take that much off the bottom, and now we've already got good alignment, but we're gonna make that even better when we fit our shoe up. So a good comparison is the right front right now versus the left front, and the length of toe that we're packing on the right front. So like I said, I think this horse suffered from certain pathologies before he got to the on the books over here. So I do think we're dealing with a little bit of a laminetic style growth pattern, which results in more toe, less heel. That then in turn results in his chronic abscessing in his heels, because those heels grow forward and he bears too much weight on them. But that difference of the length of the right front right now in the toe versus the length of the left front is a good one to keep in mind, because in my shoe set, I'll explain why I set the shoe where I do. And sometimes it's controversial because I do set the shoe back on this horse quite a bit, but it's to accommodate the growth pattern. And that's huge. If you can learn how to read growth patterns in horses and learn how to counter them with your shoe selection and your modifications that you do on shoes, I mean, it's a game changer, because that's what we're trying to do. Not only are we trying to trim the foot into balance and to accommodate the bony column, the hoof column, or the hoof structure, and all the apparatuses above the horse, but we also have to account for the time frame that we're not here. So if I set this foot up today and it's right at the point of being, like a picture perfect, got that hoof wall come down and the shoe intersects it, well, in a week, it's out of balance by 1/8 of an inch. And then 2 weeks, it's 1/4 of an inch. 3 weeks, it's 3/8 of an inch, or however the measurement's gonna go. But you lose balance way faster on feet like his because they don't grow that standard, nice stereotypical upright hoof capsule and grows a nice tidy hoof. You got manipulation and tearing of the lamina because it doesn't stay intact like you want it to. It's a train wreck per se. So the shoe set is critical, and the shoe fit is critical on a horse like this. Like I said, the setback idea, it's kind of, sometimes it's a little controversial because, robbing the hoof wall and whatnot. But when the hoof wall is not in a position to bear weight properly, what are you robbing? You're not really doing the horse any justice if you kind of play into that distortion of the hoof capsule. So same thing. So look, I mean, this foot had way more way more length out front, but he's got less depth right here at the tip of that frog. So I'm not going to be able to take very much off the bottom of this horse. So it's not all of it, but a good chunk of it's going to come from the top on this guy. So our job as shoers is to basically counteract the growth that has happened throughout the cycle, in its simplest form, and then set the horse up for success throughout this next 6 weeks, 8 weeks, or whatever it is. Okay, so I'm going to take a little bit out if I can, but I don't want to take all this. You see that big old gap right there in that wall? I would like to take it down to the wall so I can incorporate the weight bearing of the wall, but I can't, simply because I don't have enough depth right there at the tip of my frog. So I have to utilize the sole as a weight-bearing structure on this horse. So you can see on that inside heel there's some bruising, some corning going on. That's a good indication that, obviously, as we're taught, that's your heels are too high. You got to drop your heels. But when you drop your heels, then you got to be thinking about keeping your balance of your hoof capsule by setting your shoe back a little bit, or increasing the size of your shoe depending on what you're trying to achieve. See, now here's another little tidbit right there. That kind of looks like a little bit of a white line pocket. If that gets up high enough, he'll abscess. So I'm going to pack that with some copper sulfate to try and get rid of the bacteria before it turns into an abscess. And then the heel of the shoe should hold that in place. Okay, now this hoof capsule itself, it's pretty ugly. We've got medial lateral balance. Oh, this guy's heavy. I've got fairly good medial lateral balance right now, but our AP balance, anterior posterior balance, is way out of whack. We have way more toe out in front of this foot than we need. So again, with the Imagineering of seeing through all this crap right here, and there's not really a magic formula for how to assume where that lamina is. It's honestly, it's a guess until you've guessed enough times to where it's just an educated guess. So check for somewhat. It looks fairly balanced. But I mean, see that thickness right there? I mean, that's how much length I've taken off of the front of this foot. And we're going to even take more when I set the shoe on him. All right, so then going with our shoe selection, this guy's in a number 2. I need to think about, how do I shape this shoe to assist this foot through that 8-week cycle? And what it pertains, what plays a part is that you get that square toe factor to a degree. You don't want to square it off so much that then you have points of leverage at the toe quarters. So I do want to open this toe up and then start working my branches around to accommodate that. Nothing like a little cold banging. Now again, with our setting, we got to think about where we're at, the application of the animal. That's plays a huge role in how I'm going to fit my heels of this shoe. We're out here ranching. Horses are going through irrigated pastures, gathering cows. They're potentially going through some bogs. So I don't have the luxury of fitting a nice full shoe and give it good expansion. I'd love to, but it's just not really in the cards. So you get what you can, and then cross your fingers when you leave. Personally, I really like these shoes. These are a Triumph, Kirkhart Triumph, mainly because when necessary on these, even a size 2, you can see I'm swinging a 2-pound JB hammer. I can shape these shoes up pretty easy. They move very easy. So, and I'm not hitting very hard. All right, back over here on this foot that's got that little pocket of white line disease coming. What I'll do for that, because that shoe will keep copper sulfate in there for a short amount of time, what I'll do is I'll fill that just like that, and then I'll put a little dab of hoof packing over top of it, and then I'll nail my shoe on. And that shoe will keep that in there for a short amount of time, or at least long enough to allow that copper sulfate to kill that bacteria, because if that bacteria gets up into the sensitive corium of the foot, that's another reason that causes abscesses. In my experience so far, a lot of abscesses are caused more by bacteria touching the sensitive structures of the foot over something like a stone bruise or something of that nature. So if you are on top of bacteria in the hoof capsule before it makes it somewhere to create an abscess, your frequency of abscesses are much lower. Okay, got that set. Again, with our shoe set, we want to make sure that we're trying to balance that 50-50 ratio. And on these shoes, they have that beveled toe, so your breakover is actually pulled back a little bit more. When on hard ground, soft ground, it doesn't change too much. But when on hard ground, the breakover is pulled back from the leading edge of the shoe by 1/4 inch or so, 5/16. So we'll adjust these fronts and get them finished nailed up. All right, so when we're dressing feet, my first order of business is to get that toe bumped back to where it's somewhat close to that leading edge of the shoe. Now I have my rasp angled out so that I somewhat have some taper on there, because I do want a little bit of thickness of my hoof wall up here at the top. And then I also prefer the look of a foot that, if I do have to set that shoe back, has that back bevel back to it. It's personal preference. Now I'm not gonna rasp this dorsal wall to the point where it's starting to fall apart. But what I want is I want a nice straight line and no gap up here all the way down to the point there. Habitually, I almost always roll my feet off a little bit, which has never seemed to have any ill effect that I've noticed. But the point of dressing this dorsal wall is so that when I nail up, I don't have an obstruction of the wall once it comes time for finishing and clinching this foot. So I can see very, very faintly that there's a change of color in my dorsal wall right here at the very, very bottom. And so that's my stopping point. It's starting to get a little bit lighter color, like white. And that's just telling me I'm getting down through the layers of the dorsal, or the layers of the hoof wall, and I'm far enough. I'm keeping integrity of that wall. It still should be thick enough to go through the cycle and not fail. But then I also have pushed it, or I've rasped it down enough to where it's not going to interfere with rocks or mud or whatever. Now this is the foot that has more toe hanging over. So hopefully I left enough toe hanging over that other foot to be able to make these look the same. Because like I've stated in other videos, I feel like horses, for the most part, are built in pairs and somewhat symmetrical, just like we are. And there's small deviations of the size of the foot or whatever it is.
but overall we can make them look very similar in size, shape, and length. About as far as I want to take it, because I'm starting to see that really light color showing through. Now keep in mind, the reason that I'm having to rasp all this off is strictly due to growth. I can't change the growth pattern on a foot like this. I simply manage it. And so each time I come and do this horse, sometimes I rasp less, sometimes I rasp more, but each time I come work on that foot, it's very similar.
All right, well, here's the finished product on this guy. So, good dorsal wall angle, good alignment with that bony column and that pastern. Obviously, you saw where I had to set that shoe back away from the toe to accommodate the joint. Ultimately, we do have to deal with scenarios like this with a poor hoof capsule associated with a limb, but the horse still needs to do its job and the client still needs to stay happy. So that's a good bare bones shoeing, cold shaping, ranch fit on a horse. But that shoe set is what I try and go for on horses like this that grow a lot of toe length. You got to counter the growth for the next 8 weeks because that's our goal. We don't want to just see that horse walk off with a beautiful alignment today. I want to see that in 8 weeks when I come back to be as close to perfect as possible. And sometimes you got to do that by setting the shoe back. So thanks for watching, guys. Like and subscribe and share with your friends if you think it'll help somebody.